whatever it is that they talk about, because we don't know exactly what they talk about, but it must have been because of the trees, right? And so in that conversation, all of a sudden his neighbor says something that the speaker of the poem is left scratching his head. And that is, his neighbor says, good fences make good neighbors. And of course, the speaker of the poem, the irritated one, gets even more irritated. Right? And then he says, spring is the mischief in me, and I wonder if I could put a notion in his head. Why do they make good neighbors? So now he's pondering on what his neighbor said. What do you mean good fences make good neighbors? Right? And then he actually says something kind of exaggerated. He doesn't tell him this. He's thinking this, okay? Internally, he's thinking this. He's like, isn't it, right? It being like the wall, right? Isn't it where there are cows? In other words, like, don't you put fences like where pastures are, and so the cows can't like run away, right? And then he says, but there are no cows here. And so he's still thinking about this question. He's like, why do they make good neighbors? Why do fences make good neighbors? And then he says this, before I built a wall, I'd ask to know what I was walling in or walling out. You see, that line in itself is the clue and the answer partially to his question. Because never before has he actually thought about what it is that the fence actually is doing. And then he says this, and to whom I was like to give offense. In other words, he's saying, did I say something cruel to you? Did I say something mean to you that you felt like you had to build this wall? Did I do something, right? Notice, by the way, in this entire explanation that I'm sharing with you guys, notice that this irritated neighbor is only thinking about himself. And in many ways, he himself has built a wall, a metaphorical one, because he's, as he just pointed out, walling in. Because suppose this, let's try this, okay? Let's try this technique here. Suppose this pine tree of his neighbor wasn't hovering over his apple tree, right? The apple tree being the speaker of the poem here, belonging to the speaker of the poem. So let's suppose this pine tree wasn't bothering this apple tree of this interesting speaker of this poem. Do you really think the speaker of the poem would ever invite his next door neighbor for an apple pie dessert in his home? Sure, I mean, maybe some of you are thinking, why not? You know, it's a possibility. But look at his personality. He gets irritated over a pine tree that is barely hovering over an apple tree. Scratching his rooftop, or, you know, maybe even scaring the wits out of his dog or something. You know what? Whatever excuse you're gonna have multiple excuses for everything. And if you side with the speaker of the poem, then probably there's something there restless in your heart. Because even if there wasn't an excuse, what you would be doing is walling yourself in. And by the way, I'm not leaving out his neighbor, because he's doing the exact same thing. You see, the wall is creating this separation between the two, preventing them from speaking to one another. And it's only through one little conflict that they actually speak to one another. But see, therein lies the rub, as Shakespeare would say, because conflict is how we naturally conduct ourselves. Sometimes we do it on purpose, and many times we do it inadvertently. But that is a critical ingredient of our human nature. You see, our human nature is conflicting because we are restless. We were born into a broken world, nurtured through multiple brokenness. And so, yeah, it's natural for us to be conflicting. Some of us do it with a much more politeness about it, tender-heartedness about it. And then some of us do it much more blatant, more violent. But it doesn't change the facts that we are conflicting beings. And no matter what ideology or self-help book you'll read, there's nothing that will ever suffice in keeping out that restlessness. No matter how many times you tell yourself in the mirror, I am good, I am brave, I'm gonna have a great day. Do you realize that by doing that every day, you are also not realizing is that there's still a restlessness in your heart. And those walls are just one reminder, one architectural structure that reminds you that you're trying to wall the things out from you, but what you're also doing is walling in the things that are coming from you. And so maybe this pine neighbor is pretty spot on. Good fences make good neighbors because of our state of being. If we didn't have those walls, then we would probably be much more in chaotic states. And this is not to say that I'm saying that, that's the solution. Of course it's not. But it's what we can do for now in order to make amends. You see, the title of this poem is called Mending Wall. Do you actually know what mending means, or it comes from? That's why you're in the show, right? You want to know where it comes from. So, mending and amend, right? So they come from the same root word here. So let me just give you a short little brief description definition of what amending means, right? It's when you make a minor change, okay? It's when you make a minor change in order to make it fairer. Now let me repeat that again. It's when you make a minor change in order to make something fair, right? A situation fair, a conflict fair. So it has to sort of equal each other out or balance each other out. It has to be fair. Right? But what is it that you're trying to make fair? Are you trying to make fair where both of you have the same issue, that you both handle it in a way that will lessen the burden on you. That sounds fair. But what if you thought of fairness as something more like, all right, whatever problem you have with me, let me listen to it. And whatever satisfies your heart, I'll do it. Wait a minute. Jay, what did you just say? You want me to just give in to whatever he was asking for? That's preposterous. You are insane. That can never be peaceful. Really? What if you thought of conflict as this burning flame? And you can throw all kinds of stuff in it just to keep it burning. All of it. Right? Just throw all the stuff you can think about right now. Throw it into this flame. It's gonna get super hot. It's gonna just blaze. And if you did it at night, it's gonna like probably just light the entire neighborhood, right? It's just this obnoxious flame that is just never ending and just so dangerous, right? What's the one critical ingredient that this flame needs, though? Right? It needs combustible things. And it needs it constantly. Is this flame eternal? Will this flame continue to burn throughout the entire neighborhood? Sure, it may make a little bit of damage. It may alarm some people. It may halt you from doing whatever it is that you needed to do. But eventually that flame dies. And so too with it, everything that was needed to burn with it. It will be pacified. The root word of pacifying is paz, which is the Latin word for peace. So maybe if you'll just let that neighbor just throw all of the stuff that they were just really upset about, and you just listen. He's gonna run out of things to say. And when that happens, serve him a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. Maybe even an apple pie. And just say, I'll do what I can to establish peace between us. That's how you get rid of restlessness. Let them throw their burdens on you. And in return, approach them with compassion and peace. But for now, maybe good fences do make good neighbors. Because then at least you and I can approach each other when we have a conflict. And when that happens, then I want to know what's going on in your heart. I want you to share what you think you need to share with me. And when the day is done and your will is undone, then maybe I can be a great friend to you. Perhaps this is how peace is maintained, through a mending wall in this broken world. This is the J. Roland Speaks podcast. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you're having a wonderful time. What a great lesson from this wonderful, wonderful poem by Robert Frost. It's called Mending Wall. Again, if this is your first time here, thank you so much for being here. I hope you have your headphones on, your earphones on. I heard the experience is so much better. So, bienvenidos a todos. Un gran abrazo para ustedes. Espero que Dios le bendiga, que Dios le guarde, que Dios sigue bendiciéndote. Si ya no lo conoces de Dios y quieres obtener paz en tu vida, quizás, ¿por qué no buscas a Él? Él te ama, Él te quiere, pero solo honra a aquellos que honran a Él, ¿cierto? Así que gracias por estar aquí. Espero que lo disfruten muchísimo aquí conmigo en este show que se llama J. Roland Speaks. All right, guys, we are getting ready to read our next poem. Definitely don't want to miss this next one, guys. It's gonna be wonderful. Okay. All right. So before I start, let me make sure I got the right song. Let me see. Yes, I think I got the right. All right, guys. So we have a little tradition here. I need to hydrate with water. Those of you who already know my little speech about water, make sure you guys drink some water throughout the day, guys. It is so important. I'm telling you, it is the best kind of liquid that you need and should only drink. Okay, guys? But I'm not gonna tell you what to do. I'm gonna drink some water. We have a tradition here. You guys tap that screen and keep tapping it. Don't stop tapping until I come back. It's only gonna be like less than 30 seconds, so it shouldn't be a big deal. Let's get those likes up, guys. Let's get this show to people that desperately need some wonderful messages, some wonderful news, things that will edify your heart, strengthen your mind, and just be filled with a true hope, faith, love, and peace. All right, I'll be right back. Man, it feels good. Wow. What an amazing drink, right? Water is so good, guys. It's wonderful. All right. Again, if this is your first time here, if you're interested in knowing the composers for all of my tracks, all of the tracks being used in my show, I encourage you to go to Spotify and find my show. It's called J. Roland Speaks. And in the description box to every single episode, you'll find links to these wonderful musicians that deserve so much recognition, so much support. And yeah, guys, wonderful, beautiful melodies. I absolutely love these gentlemen. Incredible beings, no? All right. I got a wonderful poem to read with this track that you're listening to right now. My goodness. I'm gonna read a poem here, and I know you're gonna be sort of like thrown off by the title, but I need to read this because this is also about peace, okay? Tonight's theme is about peace, okay? Now, I know it's June, but I know many of you have maybe thought about, or maybe you went through a thrift store recently and you saw some artifacts that reminded you of, wow, we are like literally halfway to Christmas. And so I want to read a poem by one of my favorite poets. His name is Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And he wrote a poem called Christmas Bells. You're going to love this poem, okay? It's about peace. But he's going to give us a slightly different perspective where it comes from. And so I want you to pay attention to those words that he shares with us related to where peace is attained. You ready? All right. It will be narrated by Nathaniel at your service. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the J. Roland Speaks podcast. Let's do this. I heard the bells on Christmas Day. Their old, familiar carols play, and wild and sweet the words repeat of peace on earth, goodwill to men. And thought how, as the day had come, the belfries of all Christendom had rolled along the unbroken song of peace on earth, goodwill to men, until ringing and singing on its way, the world revolved from night to day. A voice, a chime, a chant sublime of peace on earth, goodwill to men. Then from each black accursed mouth the cannon thundered in the south, and with the sound the carols drowned of peace on earth and goodwill to men. It was as if an earthquake rent the hearthstones of a continent and made forlorn the households born of peace on earth, goodwill to men. And in despair I bowed my head. There is no peace on earth, I said, for hate is strong and mocks the song of peace on earth and goodwill to men. Then pealed the bells more loud and deep. God is not dead, nor doth he sleep. The wrong shall fail, and the right prevail, with peace on earth, goodwill to men. Isn't that lovely? What a delight. A work of art from this wonderful, wonderful gentleman, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, who was actually an American, just so you know. What a wonderful, wonderful piece. Let me tell you a little bit of history about this poem, by the way, guys. You're going to love this, okay? Do you want to know why and how Henry Longfellow wrote this poem? My goodness. That's right. Whenever you see me shaking my head like, my goodness, you know it's like significant. So, in the middle of the Civil War, okay, the American Civil War, Longfellow actually wrote this poem, which was adopted by a modern classic Christmas story, okay? So, he wrote this poem, started it at least, on Christmas Day in 1863. And so, this is where sort of the motivation happened. His son actually enlisted in the Union's army and had returned home seriously wounded. And so these verses that he wrote in the poem, which he included, are still generally, how should I say this? Kept. They speak of the disparity, right, of hearing the promise of peace on earth, goodwill to men, when the evidence of the world at that time was the exact opposite, right? Because how can you say peace on earth, goodwill to men, when all you see is conflict, right? And I think this is where many people have the same conclusion about when it comes to God and his son Christ, right? Like we keep hearing, right? And by the way, this is where I want to encourage all of you to like actually read it for yourself, right? And I think this is also where Longfellow also promotes this idea of like, you actually finding out for yourself. Because we keep hearing these stories about like, oh yeah, no, Jesus is love and God is love, and so of course they're going to be peaceful, right? And then it all gets sort of contradicted by all this conflict that we see, right? And so we have this natural inclination of like blaming it on God and forgetting once again that a lot of this conflict is coming from us, and mostly us. Because just like we read in The Mending Wall by Robert Frost, good fences make good neighbors. It's not to say that like some form of civility can't be attained in a humanistic way. Of course it can, but it's not always super standing, right? That's why we call it superficial eventually, right? Right? Because superficial is, right, like the second part, the later part of that word, superficial, right? It's the surface, right? It's the face, right? And every face has a topsoil, and that topsoil usually is not a steady ground, right? It's usually when you dig into the ground where you have bedrock, but it's always the topsoil that is more corrosive, erosive, etc. So the idea here is that, well, if you are trying to attain peace, then we should create this wall between us. But then the wall becomes a reminder that there is no peace, that we're going to have conflict if we don't have that wall, right? So for Longfellow, that's why he wrote this poem. Because as the first line states, he says, I heard the bells on Christmas Day. Their old familiar carols play, right? All those wonderful messages about peace on earth, goodwill to men, right? And it keeps repeating all these other types of carols, same sort of message, right? And he's not trying to be, mean or cruel about it. Once again, he's contrasting this with his son being severely wounded during the Civil War. And so he keeps going down through these passages, right? And trying to make sense of, like, why is it that we sing these carols of peace and yet we are still in conflict with one another? The Civil War, gruesome battle, so many casualties and so many deaths. And such differences in cultures, right? And so he just doesn't understand. And he gets to a point where he says, "And in despair I bowed my head. There is no peace on earth," I said. "For hate is strong and mocks the song of peace on earth, goodwill to men." But then he realizes this. And this is what I find to be the best, amazing structure, the way this poem is structured, I mean. And so this poem has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 verses. And each verse has 5 lines. And at the end of each of these verses, it ends with the same phrase of peace on earth, goodwill to men. You see, Longfellow was realizing something here, and he knew it even before he started writing this poem. But he wants us to actually understand this to its perfection. And by the way, the number 7 is a Hebrew numerical value of completeness, right? Complete. So he did this on purpose. So at the end of this entire poem, he concludes with this. "Then pealed the bells more loud and deep." So these bells that were ringing on Christmas Day, even during the Civil War, they were consistent. They never gave up. And it served as a reminder to every single person, and especially the ones that were hating one another, that no matter what you do, no matter what we do, no matter what is going on, and no matter for how long or length of time, there is peace that was shown to us on this earth, and a goodwill to men. But through our selfishness and brokenness and every single negative attribute that mankind has created for themselves, that those bells that ring on Christmas Day, reminding us of that one true man and God, that he came to restore this broken world, restore true peace and the best will to men, to all mankind. And that's when Longfellow says, "You see, God is not dead, nor doth he sleep. The wrong shall fail, and the right prevail, with peace on earth and goodwill to men." You can always tell the people that are truly at peace in their heart. You see, they have this sort of natural, attraction to them. There's this aura about them. There's this thing about them that we just naturally just want to know why they're that. And so we flock towards them and just want to know, hey, what's your secret? How do you do it? You should be in a desperation right now, just like me. You should be in such tearfulness and anger right now, just like me. You should be in misery, just like me. But no, they're at peace because they serve a God who showed them his purpose. What true faith, what true hope, and true love looks like. And as a result, they have peace in their heart. And so those type of people are walking bells on Christmas Day, every day. And even if they may not sing a tune, there's this beautiful music about them that you just want to sit there and listen to. You just want to sit in the same room, share the same aroma, drink a nice cup of tea or coffee, and just be there. Peace is restorative. Not only does it pacify, but it restores. And so perhaps when you do and are in a season where you are ready to find someone, perhaps maybe those are two attributes you should be looking for. Someone that is restorative and someone that actually pacifies all of the conflict. Because that is a natural order of attaining peace. It's consistent. It never gives up. It is hopeful. It has a faith that is unshakable. Give me 1 second, guys. Wait, can you guys hear another soundtrack playing in the background? Just out of curiosity, is there 2 tracks? Good. I think that was another audio track playing in the background, but only I could hear it on my earphones. And my voice right now? Good. All right. So, I'm gonna crank out a couple more poems tonight, guys, and we're gonna call it an evening. Thank you so much for being here. This is J. Roldan Speaks podcast. We are now back to our regularly scheduled itinerary, and let me see if I can find the next poem that I was wanting to read tonight. So, all right. Okay. Let's see. All right, so I'm going to read a poem by Sarah Flower Adams, and this one's titled let me see. This is titled "Part in Peace Is Day Before Us." So it's a question: is day before us? And let's see what you guys think of it. You guys ready? It's a relatively short poem. And all right. Here we go. Part in peace this day before us. Praise his name for life and light. Are the shadows lengthening over us? Bless his care who guards the night. Part in peace with deep thanksgiving, rendering as we homeward tread gracious service to the living, tranquil memory to the dead. Part in peace. Such are the praises God our Maker loveth best, and such the worship that upraises human hearts rest. So, in this short poem by Sarah Flower Adams, she's an English poet, by the way. She actually gives us this, how should I say this? So, the title is a question. Is day before us? So, the first half of the title is Part in Peace. So, what she's wanting to illustrate here is that when you are in a presence where you are at peace and you learn about peace, then it sort of becomes difficult, or not difficult, but challenging whenever you leave that presence. Because when you find that peace, then all you want to do is want to stay there, right? Which is why at the beginning of the show, when I was telling you guys that we find many avenues to attain some humanistic form of peace, and many times they're harmless at first, but then a lot of times they're very blatantly harmful for you. But we flock towards those constantly because this is where we think peace is attained, right? It's never fulfilling, basically. But I think Sarah Flower Adams is also trying to depict that not only is it good and wonderful and important to learn and be surrounded by peace, right? Like peaceful people, peaceful friends, peaceful situations, etc. But it's extra important to carry that peace outside of that place, right? So into the world, basically. Which is why she titled the poem Part in Peace, right? So like depart in peace, right? So like not depart from peace, but part into peace. But you're doing it by carrying that peace to the outside world. So that's why I think she did a wonderful job in like reminding us of carrying that peace into a conflicting world, because the conflicting world longs for it, right? And when I say conflicting world, I mean like every single human being longs for it. And so that's why we have to part in peace. And it's also a play on words, her title is, right? So it's not only insinuating departing into peace, but you're also parting it, right? Like you're sharing it, right? You're parting the peace for others, right? And so the second half of the question is day before us, right? So like it's a question for you to answer. Are you parting in peace? And who are you parting the peace with? And how many times are you parting the peace? Have you actually learned to be peaceful? Is this something that's instilled in your heart? I think this is what Sarah Adams was trying to illustrate here, right? And so, again, peace, remember, is pacifying, right? Pacifying in terms of trying to pacify conflicts. Peace is also restorative, right? It's consistent, that no matter what the situation is, It could be in the middle of a civil war, with those bells of Christmas Day, the carols ringing, right? Remember that poem? They are consistent, reminding us, right? So it's a reminder. And then another attribute of peace is to share it, to part with it, into it, and to part with others, right? To share it with others. This is why I was urging all of us at the beginning of the show that be careful with attaining peace in humanistic ways that only and mainly have you in isolation. This is not where peace dwells. Peace dwells in sharing with others in a community. Peace dwells in being in the presence of others that want to obtain peace also. Peace dwells where there is conflict. Good fences make good neighbors, remember that, right? So, that's not to say that you can't go for a hike up by yourself or go for a walk by yourself. Those are good things to do at times. But don't confuse and don't be blind to the fact that you are by yourself. This is where we need to be very careful, right? Anyway. Hopefully you enjoyed that. That was Part in Peace, This Day Before Us by Sarah Flower Adams. All right. This next one is by Rabindranath Tagore, and this is The Gardener 61, Peace in My Heart. Here we go. Peace, my heart. Let the time for the parting be sweet. Let it not be a death, but completeness. Let love melt into memory and pain into songs. And let the flight through the sky end, and the folding of the wings over the nest. And let the last touch of your hands be gentle, like the flower of the night. Stand still, O beautiful end, for a moment, and say your last words in silence. I bow to you and hold up my lamp to light you on your way. So there's many things that we can extract from this poem, but the one that I want to mainly focus on is the fact that when some of us do come across someone that's peaceful, and understand why they're at peace, and you get irritated by it, actually. Because as I said just a few minutes ago, sometimes we kind of scratch our head and we just kind of like think, why you should be miserable just like me? You should be upset. You should be angry. You should be sad. You should be torn up. You should be all these things, but not peace. So what I want to say here is that you gotta learn to accept it. You know, when somebody's shown compassion when they don't deserve it, they waste so much time saying why, asking why, instead of receiving it and being changed by it, having a reflexive attitude and just saying, wow, I am so sorry that I wasted so much time. One of my favorite stories, and you guys have heard this time and time again, guys, but I gotta share it because it just seems so the right moment to talk about this again. But one of my favorite stories is always going to be Les Miserables. Okay? And, you know, I can't say enough about this amazing story by Victor Hugo, by the way, who was a believer, by the way. And, you know, that one act in the entire story that is the pivotal point of why that story even exists, by the way, right? You can actually read a lot of Victor Hugo's excerpts, and, you know, if you ever read a biography about his life, it's amazing, by the way. This guy should have every reason to be the exact opposite of who he is, okay? This guy was a slave. And he found peace in his heart because he knew and found a creator that showed him how to love and forgive. And he spent his entire life writing these amazing novels. To this day, touch people's hearts. And of course, you guys, if you are familiar with the story, I just want to talk about that one act of his main character that he wrote and he described so well. A thief, a blasphemer, an obnoxious, critical, self-absorbed man. That on the day of his parole, his first act was to steal money from a young child. And his second act was to steal food from a merchant man that barely had any to feed his own family. And then his third act was to deceive and insult a priest who did nothing but share his household with him, gave him a place to stay, fed him, and even gave him room and board where he can take a nice clean bath. And what did this obnoxious thief do in return? He gets up in the middle of the night while he thinks the priest was sleeping, steals his silver, his most precious utensils, stuffs it in a bag, and then he realizes the priest was up and he caught him. And he sucker punches him and runs away. And the next day, this obnoxious thief, cruel, mean-spirited man, was caught by the local police. And he didn't realize that all these silverware that he stole had engravings on them. And of course, the officers knew these engravings, so they knew exactly where it was from. So they arrest him and investigate the case. They take this mean-spirited man, thief, sucker puncher, selfish man, take him straight to the priest, and they ask him, do these belong to you? And do you recognize this man? You know, the priest could have said so many things that day, that moment. He was bruised, insulted, stolen from, ridiculed. He had every right, every justifiable right to make whatever decision he wanted to make. Instead, he says to the officers, I do recognize him. He is my friend. I wanted him to take that silverware with him. This was a mistake. Of course, the officers were left confused and actually asked him again, do you not want to press charges? Officers, the priest said, let him go. This house belongs to the Lord, and he is welcome here anytime. And they let him go. This thief that the priest forgave, his name is Jean Valjean. And for the first time in his life, Jean Valjean wept, cried, confused. And he couldn't understand why this priest did this. Because Jean Valjean wasted so much time pitying himself, justifying his actions. No one cares for me. no one could ever care for me. And he actually wasted some time trying to figure out why the priest would forgive him. But see, the priest himself was shown forgiveness. And see, forgiveness is for people that don't deserve it. And it's the greatest lesson any man or woman could ever learn. And in my experience, it's been the hardest and greatest lesson ever. You see, Victor Hugo, the author of this amazing story, as I said, this man